I read Clash of Kings, second book in A Song of Ice and Fire. Just like the first book, this one was also really good and longer. I read this one about a month. I think I might have read it faster than the first book. It's really good though. With the first book, the first book is pretty close. Like the first season of Game of Thrones pretty closely followed the first book, and even though it's still good, it was like, okay, I kind of know this already. I've experienced it. It's all kind of like, it's not really a surprise. But with this one, it starts to, well, there are a few differences. Aren't like a ton. The main skeleton of the story and everything is still pretty similar to the second season of Game of Thrones, but the main difference is the actual war, the War of the Five Kings, it's called, is, well, a lot more happens in the war, and there are a lot more battles to it, and just a lot more concerning that war that the TV show wasn't able to include because of budget restraints and time constraints, I think. But so it was nice to see more in that war. Like, it was an actual war, with actual battles and everything, and that's probably the biggest highlight of this book, is actually being able to see the war play out a bit more, and just understanding some more of the story and what happens. Another thing is that, I mean, I've noticed with the last one, but it really kind of hit home in this one, mainly because Theon has some POV chapters in this, and so that's kind of how I realized it. But it's nice to really be able to like see the characters in the books and understand like what they're thinking, their thoughts are, and really being able to understand, grasp their character. Which, I mean, you can grasp the characters in the show and everything, but the books just take it to another level of really understanding what's going through their head and who they really are and everything. I mentioned Theon. He's probably the greatest example of this, because in the TV show, he's really just portrayed as like pathetic, which he still is, but being able to read his POV in the book and everything, there's a lot more to his character, and there's a lot more to understand than just, oh, he's kind of a pathetic character. In the book, he's not really portrayed as pathetic. He's more portrayed as lonely, like a lone wolf, because, you know, he's taken in by the Starks as like a captive, kind of, you know, like a prisoner. And so his whole arc is, because he's able to go back to his people, able to go back to the Iron Islands, but his whole arc is like, oh, are you really a Greyjoy, or are you actually a Stark? And so like his people don't really, like, they don't respect him or anything because they don't know him. He's been gone for 10 years or whatever, and as far as they're concerned, Theon's a Stark instead of a Greyjoy. And so it just really goes into Theon's perspective of that, and how that really makes him feel like isolated, and like he needs to earn their respect, and all that. Which, yes, the show does too, but I'll just say the show portrays it in a more pathetic light, and the book is more like understanding. But it was really great read, and pretty much everything I've got to say about the first one, I could probably say about this one too. Characters, like, George R. R. Martin is a master at his craft. His characters are phenomenal, and they have so much depth to them, and it's amazing. I guess another thing I would say is each of like the plot lines in this book really feel like unique and distinct, and they don't really feel like they drag on or are just kind of repeating the same thing, which the show does a little bit, nothing terrible. But the biggest part of this is probably Tyrion and Shay's arc, because in the show, it kind of just starts to follow a pattern, but because there's so much that needs to happen in the book, and they only have, like, I don't know, just under 1,000 pages to tell it, they don't get as much screen time. They just have the necessary moments. They have the necessary moments with Tyrion and Shay, and they don't have anything extra, and the pattern with them doesn't like keep repeating. It's kind of like, it happens like twice. You're like, okay, I get their relationship with each other, and then, like, you know, it spends the rest of its time on other characters with other storylines, and, you know, it's just really wise. It's really, George R. R. Martin is really good at balancing each of the storylines and making sure none of them get too dull or boring, and keeping them all interesting. And that goes for Arya's too. found that her story in season 2, her plotline was kind of like boring, but I found it really engaging in this one. Like when I was going into this one of the things I was like not looking forward to is Arya's plotlines, because like I knew what was happening, I knew where it was gonna go, and I knew her plotline in this one, and I was just kind of groaning, like, I've seen that already. I don't really want to have to read that. That's gonna be boring. But then I read it, and it's actually done really well, and like it wasn't as boring as I thought it was going to be. It's actually really good, and that brings me to probably like the one complaint I have is Daenerys's storyline. Hers is kind of boring. I don't know. Like I couldn't even really tell you why. It was just kind of boring. And whenever I got to a chapter, I was just kind of like reading it as fast as I could, trying to get through it, and not like really reading it. Um, but also like she doesn't have that many chapters in either, so it doesn't really focus on her that much. That's my only complaint. Even though this one was long, it was easy to get through. It was a breeze. It was so good. Like I genuinely really enjoyed this, and I definitely recommend to anyone that wants to start reading, or anyone that's even a fan of the show, read the books. Like I highly recommend it. They are so good, and they really just give you more depth of the world of Westeros and more knowledge and all that. And so I highly recommend this book.